in a little bit. We're going to talk today about must-have skills for building a career in the nonprofit fundraising, not sort of generally, but as we look forward to the next decade, the next 5 years, what are the skills that are become much more important than they were? Um, and we'll dive in there. A couple quick notes. In the spirit of career building, this event is CFRE approved for 1.0 credits. At the end of the session, we'll drop a survey in the chat. Please fill it out, and that way we'll be able to back you up. Excuse me. Here's the agenda for today. I won't read it out. Important part is that the recording and the slides will be sent around after. Feel free to take notes if you want to, but you'll get all this later. Feel free to share it with your coworkers. We'll send the recording around. A lot of people, what they do is they sort of get the recording and the slides. They also share it with their whole company or their team. So feel free to do that as well. Nothing precious about that. Quick intros. My name is Patrick. Lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny, pictured here. Currently in Miami, Florida, where it is not snowing. And Jenny is all the way across the country in the great city of Seattle. We are lucky, as I mentioned, to be the founders of FreeWill, which is the biggest estate planning and plan giving company in the United States, trusted by 1,800 leading nonprofits, including the American Red Cross, the Amnesty International, Komen, United Way, a lot of smaller organizations, a lot of large organizations, featured in things like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, among many other things. But even more importantly, we were lucky to be part of a wonderful team of more than 220 people, which is crazy. Raised more than $11 billion in nonprofits to date, and over 4 centuries, probably more like 5 at this point, of combined fundraising experience and expertise. So very excited to support you. Kimberly's in Miami, so down the street. All right, back to books that I love. So one of the things that we're going to do today in the spirit of building your careers is there's a great book that is now, probably 20 years old. I think I read it in 2011, so might be 15 years old. But it's a great book by Jerry Hauser and Allison Green. It's called Managing to Change the World, a Nonprofit's Manager's Guide to Getting Results. It's one of the books from something called the Management Center, which we think of as one of the better management trainings in the nonprofit sector, but also across the globe. So I've given this book to people who work in for-profit companies. Management tends to be not that different. It's quite useful. Really excellent book. So we'll give this to 20 people as a gift. One of the things to know here is that you don't have to be a manager to understand management. In fact, it's quite useful to understand management, whether or not you are a manager or being managed, or in many cases, both, right? You are being managed by someone and you are managing some people. And so it's a really great study. It's a relatively short book. It's extremely practical. You will read the book and think, oh, I'm a lot smarter than I was when I started that book. So make a note in the survey if you'd like a chance to get it. We'll send a copy to 20 people. Again, we can't send it to everybody, even though we love all of you, just because that gets prohibitively expensive. So let's talk about how your week is going before we dive in. Generally, people are feeling happy and good, despite obviously one of the most challenging weeks in California in an extremely long time. So our hearts go out to the folks in LA, but generally strong. A little bit of a dip in terms of confidence in hitting our goals, but it's so early in January that we're not going to make a ton of this yet. Just a quick note on the book. I know some folks are mentioning this in chat. At the end of the session, we'll drop a survey in the chat, and that will help. That's where you can sort of request a book if you have one. All right, so let's talk about where the future of work is going across the board, not just in the nonprofit sector, but across the US in particular, which is where we're going to borrow a lot of these stats. But if you are in Canada, if you are in Tanzania, if you're off the coast of French Guiana, if you are in Australia listening to this on a recording, a lot of these factors will be in play across the board. So the first thing to know about work in 2025 and beyond is that a lot of people will stop working very soon. Some of you may be close to retirement. Some of you may have a lot of colleagues who are close to retirement. And the US and most Western countries, as well as countries like Japan and China, are facing a retirement wave. 2024 was a record-breaking year for retirement. This trend will likely continue through 2027 and beyond, but we have extreme certainty over the next few years. From 24 to 2027, approximately 4.1 million Americans will turn 65 every year. Many of these will retire around this time. It is the largest surge of retirement age Americans in history. And these folks, for the most part, are leaving the workforce after a very strong career. Between 24 and 30, up to 15 million jobs will be replaced, meaning folks retiring and other folks have to step into it. One of the problems in this is that boomers are the largest generation in American history, and there aren't enough workers joining the workforce to fill their gap. Many boomers, as you might expect, will be retiring from leadership and senior positions. And what we know is that Gen X, the following generation, is not as large as boomers. So there may not actually be enough Gen Xers to fill all the roles that boomers are leaving behind. This creates a demand for leadership and senior specific skills, right? So these sort of specific seniority related skills that are leaving the workforce in droves across the board. You can see here how many more folks are 65 and over as a percentage and total, right? That top graph is total. Look at how many people are over 65 in 2020 compared to 1960, compared to 1920, even compared to the year 2000, right? So fundamentally, there are a lot more folks of retirement age and beyond than there ever have been in the United States history. And you can see as a percentage of total population how high this goes, right? So really meaningful shift in the entirety of how the US and Western economies are going to operate. Later, we'll talk about planned giving, but just keep this in mind, right? The percentage of older folks in America is so much higher than it ever was, and that's going to shape every aspect of society. One of the things that means is that there's a lot of folks leaving the workplace, and there's a lot of jobs. And so suddenly what we have for the last several years is an inversion of the typical challenge. You look for almost all of time, there were more unemployed workers than there were job openings. But since the recovery after early pandemic, there have been more job openings than unemployed workers. Now, it doesn't mean every worker is a perfect fit for every job opening. So there's still unemployment. But you can see, A, how much lower unemployment is than it often used to be. And keep in mind that our population is growing. But now that job openings above unemployment means that there's actually a labor shortage in many areas. Part of this is what we call the labor force participation rate. What does that mean? It means how many adults who could work, usually tends to be in sort of a given range, are working. And you can see it obviously dropped very briefly during pandemic, but for the most part, it's hanging around 62 and a half, which is much lower than the 66 number it was for a bunch of the early 2000s. And then it sort of drifted down. Why is it drifting down? Because we have more people who are post-retirement, not because people aren't choosing not to work. And why did it go up in the first place? Well, you saw the rise of women in the workforce. So this is quite different. When we think about more jobs than people, again, there are 8.1 million jobs opening as of this morning, 7.1 million unemployed workers, 12 million people are employed by nonprofit organizations in particular. 8 out of 10 folks at nonprofits cite staff shortages as a top issue. Over the next 10 years, more people will be leaving the workforce and entering it. And so this problem is going to be exacerbated, right? We need to understand trends and understand where we are in the trend line. We're in the middle, where there will always be more vacancies than people to fill them going forward. Second component, which does help a little bit with this matching problem, is that work for home is here to stay. So this is an enormous shift over the last 6 years. 20% of US workers now work remotely, including me, including many of you, and this figure will likely increase over the next decade. Fewer employers required full-time in-office attendance in 2024 than previous years. You may have sensed this. 83% of nonprofits offer work flexibility. More organizations are offering hybrid or remote-only working options for employees. My sense is that the remote-only working option is going to increase in the future, because if you are running a community foundation in Cincinnati and you can't find the right person to hire in Cincinnati, well, you may be able to find the right person in Minnesota or Florida or Texas or California or wherever, but only in a remote opportunity. Remote work options become a top priority for job seekers in today's market. 98% of workers express a desire to work remotely at least part-time. In fact, research from the US Career Institute shows that 63% of workers view remote factor as the single most critical factor in a job, right? So some remote flexibility is even more important than salary or benefits or health insurance, just to give you an idea how important this is. Now, this is really, really interesting. One thing that I think goes under-mentioned in the shift to remote, this is a really important point, we tend to have relatively long longevity. People that work at FreeWill is an entirely remote environment. Now, one of the reasons I think that is that when we look back 20 years, a lot of times the reason people left a job is because their spouse got a new job in a different place. And so you ended up with this sort of trailing spouse phenomenon, whether that spouse was male or female, and whether it was a heterosexual or not relationship. But you ended up basically where one spouse got to follow their career path and the other one sort of had to trail, or in some cases they had to trade off, right? People say, oh, it was my turn to advance my career, and then we moved for their career, et cetera. And that's no longer the case in a remote world where you actually have a lot more options. So it's really, really interesting. Again, just to show you what the most important aspects for people looking for jobs is, remote work, 63%, then salary, obviously important, schedule flexibility, which goes with remote work, 55, work-life boundaries, having a good boss, 48%. Now, in fact, actually having a good boss is one of the number one factors along with commute time in terms of what actually drives happiness in your work. So if you are a manager and you would like to make the lives of your employees better or your managees better, become a better manager. And one of the ways you can do is read the book that we just shared. On this topic, nonprofits will most likely opt for a structured hybrid working model. This model establishes clear expectations about the amount of time an employee works from home versus the office. Nearly 40% of employers have adopted this model, up from 20% only 2 years ago. I mean, this is a remarkable shift in a relatively slow-moving industry that this has doubled in just really 2 full years. 30% of hybrid workers and 60% of fully remote workers are likely to leave their jobs if they don't maintain that remote flexibility. So this is a really important component. Employees and employers both benefit from a flexible work arrangement. Remote work decreases friction in the hiring market. Again, it lets you find more people, it lets you keep more people. And for you, it means there are more job opportunities because theoretically you can work with any company anywhere in the US. 56% of hiring managers believe working remotely has gone even better than expected. I would put myself in that same category. I was very nervous in March of 2020 when our then 30 employees had to all go home and work from home the next day, and they crushed it. And we crushed it as a team, and it's been really wonderful to see. And so hopefully that continues. When we ask you, are you able to work remotely in your current role? 24% say 100% remotely. 47% say 1 to 2 days a week. 22% say occasionally, depending on the week. And look at this. Only 7% say, no, I'm not allowed to work remotely. 93% of folks in this sphere, right, nonprofit fundraisers, can work remotely at least some of the time. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide right here. 5 years ago, 54% could not work remotely. So 46% could in some portion. Now that number is 97%. 54% could not. Now that number is 7%. I mean, this is a remarkable sea change in 5 years. I mean, one of the sort of biggest shifts in the way that work works that we've seen in the last 30 years, potentially since the internet. So really, really wild to see. Hayden says, wow, that's a crazy increase. Hayden, I literally typed almost exactly that to my colleague Phoebe, who pulled that stat when I saw it the first time. Trend 3, AI, the helpful coworker. So the US is a leader in AI adoption, adopting AI at a faster rate than other countries, and also at a faster rate than personal computers and the internet got adopted. And nonprofits, really interestingly, are actually adopting AI faster than the private sector or the for-profit sector, with 58% using AI compared to 47% of B2C businesses. B2C means business to consumer, people selling directly to consumers, not selling to businesses. That's what that means. AI shines in automating repetitive tasks, generating content, brainstorming, and so much more, which makes it a very good for a lot of these folks. We'll be curious. Humayun says, William by FreeWill is a great assistance for me. Thank you. I built the first version of what we call Willie, and then our engineering team built William. That's much better, to be honest, than what I built. When you look at experience with generative AI by age, you can see folks in the boomer generation, 2024, only 4% don't know about AI and 12% have no exposure. So 84% of boomers have tried AI at least once. And that actually is interestingly higher than younger folks. So really, really curious here across the board. So you're starting to see a lot of folks at every level use AI. Now, why is this? When we think about older folks and boomers, these are folks who had to adapt to the internet at some point, had life without the internet, and then used it, obviously had life without a mobile phone, and then used it. And so we're actually used to this sort of ongoing shift in technologies. Um, when we ask you if you use AI in your work, I mean, you can see 68% of you said yes, up from 11% less than 2 years ago. I mean, think about how stunning this is. Can you think of another technology that took sort of what caught, I was going to say like wildfire, bad metaphor, that sort of took off like this compared to any other tech in history, and we haven't seen it, right? There's no sort of obvious proof here of what that looks like. Going back to AI for a second, 4 in 10 workers still worry that AI will take their jobs. In our sense, and this isn't to sort of put a hopeful spin on it, it's a real take, is that the future is about co-working with AI, not being replaced by it. AI does have the potential to automate at least 10% of tasks in the US economy. I think that's too low. I think that estimate should actually be more aggressive. That's a McKinsey estimate. But building AI proficiency will be essential for those moving out of declining industries into higher paying roles, right? So being good at AI will be really useful. I don't think that AI will be better than you at your job. I do think that a person who's good at AI and using AI will be better at you than you not using AI, right? Same way that I'm going to win a race against any human on the planet. And if I get a bicycle or better yet, a car, and it's me and technology against that person. Same way that a carpenter who, doesn't have access to a hammer or wrench or nails is going to be a much weaker carpenter. All of these things, right? Humans are constantly using tools alongside us to be better versions of ourselves. So let's talk about, that's sort of our broad view on the job market. Those of you that are raising teenagers or thinking about sort of getting your kids into college and jobs beyond, these are some of the thoughts that will be sort of interesting to them. I'll be really curious to see what it's like for people who have always worked in remote environments and how their experience changes. That can be a lot more difficult, I think, than having that 5 or 10 years of training in an office environment and then pivoting to remote. When we ask you what your role is, 47% say I'm a mid-level fundraising professional, 11% say I'm a program manager or coordinator, 12% say I'm a senior leadership role, 13% say I'm a VP or head of fundraising, 2% are executive directors, and we have some other folks as well. About time spent with donors, about 66% of you spend 0 to a quarter, but then 23% say spend a quarter to half of all your time with donors. 6% or so spend half to 2/3, and a small percentage spend almost all of your time with donors, which is really, really interesting. Okay, so what's happening in the nonprofit sector? Well, first and foremost, this sort of view of more jobs than people is continuing. We're really seeing increased fundraising vacancies. Limited staff, limited bandwidth are already 2 major obstacles for nonprofits. 3 out of 4 nonprofits reported job vacancies at their organizations. A third of those nonprofits identified vacancy rates of 20% or more, right? When you're losing 20% of your staff, that is a huge challenge, a really, really big problem. The most prepared orgs will have a succession plan in preparation for leadership departures. If you are a manager, you want to, especially an executive director, you want to look at your organization, actually have some conversations with people you think might be retiring in a few years, and say, how do we help you have a great last few years? If you want to retire, if not, no problem. And if you do, who's going to fill those shoes, and how do we sort of put someone on a glide path to succession there? The most prepared employees will be upskilling or using AI to fill those gaps, but also there's no substitute for learning from somebody who's more experienced than you. Insight 2, switching huge gears. We talked about this a little bit at the end of last year. Tax reform has radically changed the way fundraising works. Not intentionally, but it certainly has changed it. So in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed. It went into effect in 2018. What happened? Many of you remember this. We're going to recap it for everybody. It doubled the standard deduction, which meant everyone automatically, a married couple gets about a $20,000 standard deduction, and it started capping things like state and local taxes that you pay. It capped the amount of mortgage interest you can deduct. And so for mortgages taken after December 15th, it's deductible up to $750, which is less than it used to be. Now, what happens? So who cares about mortgage deductions and state and local taxes? Why does this mean anything for fundraising? Well, it turns out that most taxpayers get bigger tax breaks from taking the standard deduction than when they tack on all those things to get an itemized deduction. Now, one of the challenges is all those things included charitable contributions, which are tax deductible, right? For so often you've said make a tax deductible gift. Well, it turns out that starting in 2018, only 10% of Americans itemized deductions, down from 30% pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which means 9 out of 10 people get little to no tax benefit for giving normal cash. In fact, this really hurt charitable giving. University of Notre Dame found that charitable giving fell by $16 billion, capital B billion, annually in the first year of implementation. And so we might think, okay, what's happening? We're pushing down, right? There are fewer people giving cash and giving small amounts of cash, especially in that 90% range. Smaller dollar donations will continue to decline. Cash donations once offered tax benefits. For 90% of people, they no longer offer any tax benefits. And at its core, what this means is we've had inflation in what it costs to give to charity. For the average person who does not itemize their taxes, cash donations became more expensive than they used to. Just as an example, if I give $100 in 2010 and I was making $80,000 a year then, which I was not, but we're going to use this for math, it would have cost me $75 because 100 of that would have been tax deductible. And so I would have paid $25 less in taxes. But today, again, making $80,000, it costs the full $100. And so suddenly that gift is 33% more expensive, right? Forget inflation in groceries or used cars or gas. This is incredible, 33% more expensive. And the basic of economics is that when price goes up, demand goes down, right? And so you end up with fewer gifts. This is going to cause a huge move towards non-cash gifts where donors still get a tax benefit. And in fact, we've already seen that happen. Now, some people were looking at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and said, well, don't worry about it. It's going to expire in 2025. And yet, some of you might be aware that we had an election in the United States in November and that Republicans control all three branches of government. Now, when was the last time they controlled all three, what do we call these? Not branches. Both houses in the presidency. The Supreme Court is the third branch, or the judiciary is the third branch. But suffice to say, last time they had what we call a trifecta was 2016 and 2017, which what they did do, they passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so we are likely to see something very similar renewed, and we have another 7 or 8 years of this type of tax behavior. Successful nonprofits need to prioritize planned and major giving in this period, and fundraisers who are proficient in solving these things, right? How do we still get all these big gifts and still hit our goals are going to be incredibly attractive candidates for open roles and promotions. When I was thinking about putting all these things together, I thought, if I'm a VP of development right now at a major or mid-major nonprofit, or even a small nonprofit, what attributes am I looking for in someone I cannot wait to hire? And one of them is proficiency in soliciting non-cash gifts and planned gifts, because I know these are going to be the big gifts, and I know that cash gifts are on the decline. Okay, insight 3. As we think about where the jobs are going to be, historically, if you wanted an absolutely great long-term high-paying job in nonprofits, your best bet, not your only bet, but your best bet was to run to Washington, D.C., or run to New York City, or in some cases, Boston or Philadelphia, right? Those were really the hubs of long-standing nonprofits. And yet we have remote work, AI shaping this. We have regions like the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic, the South experiencing population growth, getting really deeply entrenched nonprofits. And so job vacancies will be much more accessible outside traditional nonprofit hubs, in part because of the rise of nonprofits there, and in part because of remote work. So you can go work for that great DC organization somewhere else. This should open the door to more high-paying roles in more affordable cities, more job opportunity overall. And generally, I'm of the belief that spreading access to opportunity more broadly geographically is a deeply good thing for the country and for the world. All right, insight 4. AI is not here for your fundraising job, as we talked about, but there's a lot of understandable concern about the impact of AI on our jobs. The jobs are actually some of the best suited to benefit from AI evolution, and we can rely on it to do our jobs better and faster. It will serve as a replacement for jobs and tasks that are easily automated. Data entry, admin tasks, data analysis, grant research, proposal writing, etc., are all examples of tasks that can be automated by AI. But what we're seeing here is the voluntary turnover rate for nonprofits is 19%. Basically means 1 in every 5 nonprofit employees will leave their job this year. This is much higher than the 12% for the broader labor market. And according to a global survey, 60% of workers believe that AI can help with burnout, right? So you've had a hard job. Nonprofit jobs are hard. You have a hard job. It is endless. You hit your goals. You have to hit them again next quarter. AI can play a really big role here. And a study conducted by Stanford, my alma mater, and MIT found that AI implementation led to a significant increase in workforce productivity. And by the way, that MIT study also found dramatically higher happiness when folks were using AI, right? So higher happiness and satisfaction with the work. Insight 5, the Great Wealth Transfer amplifies the importance of plan giving. The Great Wealth Transfer has begun, and it will continue over the next 20 to 25 years. Remember that graph from early in the webinar when we looked at that huge population of folks over 65? Well, the graph of people over 70 and 80 and over 90 is going up day by day. This population is set to pass down $84 trillion to younger generations and charities. And so you want to make sure you're good enough to get those gifts. Nonprofits can expect to receive more unexpected plan gifts than ever before, and expertise in plan giving will be in high demand. Now, a lot of the smartest people in plan giving right now, not all, but many of the smartest people in plan giving right now are baby boomers who are going to retire just as the most important time in plan giving comes, right? It's because they're part of this enormous demographic wave, and the older boomers are turning 80 next year. And so really you're starting to see this enormous wave starting, but the youngest boomers, 1964, turning about, what do we got? 62 next year, right? 62. And so just as plan giving becomes so important, you see this massive retirement of the people who know most about plan giving. Now, it's not an accident. That's how demographics work, but it means there's going to be incredible opportunities for folks who are not retiring. Could be boomers, could be Gen X, could be millennials, could be Gen Z. All of those people have a huge role to play in plan giving. As a reminder, bequests were the only portion of giving that grew beyond inflation in 2023. I expect 2024 to be a better year and more areas to grow, but bequests will continue to grow, right? So if you are a mid-level fundraising professional and you are not yet feeling smart about plan giving, this is the year that you get smart about it. Plan giving will be an increasingly important component of every successful team strategy, so make it happen. I want to sort of pause to give you one incredibly important takeaway, which we've already covered, but I want to make sure it's really driven home as you think about your year ahead planning for your organization, but also your 5 to 10 years as professionals in building your career. So the single most important thing to know about fundraising in the next decade is not AI, even though AI is going to be incredibly important. In one sentence, small dollar cash giving is in precipitous decline. I mean, really just year over year over year decline, while major and plan giving are on the dramatic rise, right? So one is falling and one is rising. And organizations that want to stay on the sinking ship are going to have a hard time, and organizations that are rising with the rising tide will do a lot better. Now, why, right? Why? We've already talked about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, cash giving is more expensive for most adults, which is a huge problem. Inflation has hurt lower and middle class folks, making them less likely to have extra income to give. Checks are disappearing. Now, this is one of the things that people don't talk about enough, but so much of giving historically has been done on checks, which are unlimited, as opposed to credit cards, which often have caps every month, especially at end of year, right? One of the tragedies about credit cards is end of year shopping coincides with end of year giving, and so people can max out their credit cards, and that's a big component. And also decreasing religiosity, whatever your views on decreasing religiosity is, what happens is that most people don't get in the practice of giving at a young age because they're not going to church or mosque or synagogue in the way they were 30 years ago. And so what you end up with having to teach 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds about giving in a way that just simply wasn't true in years past. Why are major and plan gifts on the rise as small dollar gifts are on the decline? Well, the 10% who still itemize have a strong incentive to give. There's huge tax benefits to stock giving, huge. The rise of IRAs and tax advantage of making gifts out of these. So years and years ago, when we talked to older donors, they would have mostly had pensions, and now they mostly have IRAs, 401ks and IRAs. And you can give directly out of an IRA and get the tax advantage that you wouldn't get from giving cash. And then donor advised funds are exploding for a whole bunch of reasons, $250 billion and counting sitting in these. And this is another reason that major and planned gifts are on the rise. So very, very, very important. And then, of course, the great wealth transfer, probably the most important attribute over the next 10 years, right? So these are the things driving in one direction. We see things pushing cash down, and we really need to get our heads around this reality so that we actually can take action on it. Okay, as we move into skills, right? What are the 5 skills you absolutely need? Most of you know this, but there's a gap between hard skills and soft skills. So hard skills are technical skills, which are specific to the type of work that you do, often rooted in expertise, typically quantifiable and measurable, making them easy to evaluate. Skills which are learned through formal methods like education, training programs, certifications, online courses, on-the-job experience. For fundraisers, example of valuable hard skills include grant writing, CRM management, event planning, etc. Now, soft skills or workplace skills are often the how behind the work you do. They're skills that make you effective connecting with donors, working with colleagues, active listening, relationship building, problem solving. These all count as soft skills necessary for adept fundraisers. Employees who demonstrate both soft skills and hard skills, on average, from a LinkedIn study, get promoted 13% faster than employees with only hard skills. Only soft skills also doesn't get you anywhere. It is a myth that soft skills cannot be learned or developed. People think, oh, they were just built with that. They have charisma, whatever, whatever. As an example, some people I know have taken an active listening class. Here's a link to one that is free on the platform Coursera. We have no relationship with Coursera, except we take, at least I take classes on it sometimes. It's quite enjoyable. But imagine just spending 4 hours really practicing some of the habits of active listening, and you will see a dramatic improvement in your relationships and your ability to communicate with donors and your teammates, right? So these are one of the areas where you can actually sort of just spend a little bit of time and have really, really excellent growth. So check that out and let me know what you think as well. Tristan says, can I share a link? If you fill out the survey, we will send the full slides around. And so this will be clickable from the slides. Thank you so much. Bunch of people are raving about Coursera as a resource. Quite useful. I'm actually taking a class on introduction to classical music, just out of curiosity right now. And I listen at the gym or when I'm driving, and it's been really excellent. All right, so let's talk about the great skills of every fundraiser. We know what's happening in the world. We know what's happening in fundraising. We sort of talked about the difference between hard skills and soft skills. So there's a couple of key things that we just want to get good at. One is AI fluency and continuous learning, right? Being skilled in AI gives you a distinct competitive edge in the job market. LinkedIn features over 100 AI-related skills. There are plenty of opportunities to level up. For now, mastery of AI tools will signal to employers that you're forward-thinking. These skills will soon go from preferred to required, the way that things like knowledge of Excel and word processing, used to be a nice to have, and now they're required as well. Here's an example of how to highlight the skill on your resume. If you wrote something like leverage artificial intelligence to optimize donor outreach, increase personal engagement by 25%, and driving a 15% increase in donor retention rates, and I was a VP of fundraising, I would hire you immediately. This is exactly the kind of thing that our teams are looking for. We're looking to be more efficient, to drive better outcomes from donors. If you can say, I use these affordable tools to have this really impressive outcome, that is a paragraph that screams, hire me right now and then give me a raise, right? I mean, really, really important stuff across the board. Some resources to get started. There are a few AI basics back to Coursera. We're a little bit of Coursera fanboys today, apparently. Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, many of these are free. Some of them have paid attributes as well. Other AI-powered online tools to poke around with: Claude, ChatGPT, Perplexity is good for search. And then advanced tools for those seeking experience building models: Google's Teachable Machine, IBM's Watson's free tier. And then two small notes actually. If you apply for grants, make it a priority to check out grantassistant.ai. Now, this is a company that's affiliated with FreeWill, so I'm just going to name that. But it is truly unbelievable. And everyone I've talked to who does grant work and sees this, their jaws drop and then they sign up to get it. It is unbelievably outstanding. So feel free to type it in right now, grantassistant.ai, or you can just make a note in the survey if you're interested. But if you have anything to do with grants, this is one of the best things you can do for your organization this year. Second aside, before we get off of AI, next week, 2 weeks from now, I think, 2 weeks from now, we're going to do a deep dive on AI and specifically and extremely practical uses to drive better outcomes this year. So we're not going to spend much more time on AI, but to give you a sense there. Thanks, Phoebe. My friend and colleague Phoebe dropped in the chat. All right, skill number 2. Effective remote communication and management. So it is the case with this level of remote work and donors, you are now going to be communicating remotely far more than you ever have been. This really changes the way that we're doing body language. It changes other elements. As a manager in 2034, you could be leading teams spanning 4 generations. You could do this could be true, by the way, in 2025, right? You could be managing this. Gen Alpha or Gen Beta just got born, so we're already two generations past Gen Z. We know that there are different communication preferences. Generally, folks in the Gen X and baby boomer world were trained to prefer formal and more detailed communication. Something like, please review the attached detailed plan and share your feedback via email by the end of the week. And this is obviously a little bit of generalization. Gen X is relatively similar. Millennials and Gen Z in particular, tend to be a little bit less formal. They're comfortable with direct but more informal communication. Quick reminder, team starts at 10 a.m. on Zoom. Formality sometimes goes out the window with Gen Z. Meeting in conference room right now, see you in 5 as an example, right? And being able to what we call code switch between generations can be quite useful. Putting aside the style of communicating and focus on what's important, right? Are people being brief? Are they being clear? Are they having empathy? And are they solving problems? So very important. If you're a manager, clearly outline communication protocols for your direct report. Not what is your preference, but what is most important for the job. Debbie just says, always consider the age of your donor. Jen, if you're a Gen Zer, you need to be able to communicate with Gen Z donors, and you need to be able to communicate with Gen X, millennials, and boomer donors as well. So you need to be able to make those donors feel comfortable. If your nonprofit uses something like Teams to communicate, avoid relying on email to get in touch with team members or Slack. Determine whether video conferencing, audio messages, or direct messages are preferred. It's actually worth having this explicitly written out in a company document. So what we find is that FreeWill welcomes people, welcomes employees, ranging from maybe 22, 23, all the way into their 60s and beyond. And not everyone grew up with exactly the same communication styles. And so we try to be very clear. This is what we use Slack for. This is what we use email for. If it's important and urgent, make a phone call, et cetera, et cetera. But so everyone sort of has a sense of what do these different mediums mean and what are they used for. Be consistent with how you communicate, since remote communication can easily be misinterpreted, and have a lot of empathy for folks. When you might miss something on Slack or something on Zoom might come across a little bit strange. This will improve your work relationship, and it can help you avoid ambiguity and let others know that you're reliable. Skill 3, extreme comfort with major donors is going to be another component of a must-have skill set going forward. The giving capacity of major donors has grown significantly in recent years, especially compared to small donors. As we continue to see a decline in the share of small dollar donors, which is an ongoing theme and will be a theme for the next 10 years, we absolutely have to be excellent at connecting with major donors. Here are 3 ways to get better at major donor strategy in a relatively short amount of time. One is focus on building personal relationships and go study the process of building personal relationships. Many of the more accomplished fundraisers and leaders and connectors that have studied this as opposed to simply had an intuitive knack for it. We want to make it easier for them to give. We'll talk more about smart gifts in a moment. We want to be able to educate them on the benefits of non-cash giving in simple, clear ways. For adaptability, this is a bit of the soft skill, but for most of us, a lot of what we do is out of our control. And our choices are how we react to those things, not just wishing that we could control the things we can't. And so when we think about expecting the unexpected, we must remain flexible and prepared to be ready for these things. Some of you in California right now are adjusting to a totally different fundraising plan than you might have had only 2 weeks ago, right? All of this is about to change, and we're starting to see a world that is changing faster and accelerating its pace of change. And so there's no sort of getting back to normal, right? The new normal will continue to evolve, as it has, by the way, basically since the 1770s, when sort of pace of change picked up across the board. This means being finely tuned to the team's priorities, accepting when some tactics aren't working anymore, and being willing to pivot based on logic models to other strategies as necessary. Fifth, we have 2 to close out on skill 5. One is plan giving expertise, right? So by 2041, all boomers will have reached or surpassed average life expectancy of 77 years old. Again, we're looking at 80 trillion plus. Prioritize plan giving now and your expertise will be incredibly valuable and extremely high demand in 10 to 15 years. Let me let you in on a little secret, which is nobody in the plan giving world wants to say it is not that hard. It requires some meaningful, intentional, focused learning. But if you said, I want to be a plan giving expert in 1 year, you would 100% be a plan giving expert in 1 year, right? There is not so much to learn. There are different ways to talk, different ways to think about it, different ways to communicate with donors. But at the end of the day, it's another type of giving that we need to get familiar with. And we need to continue to build our relationships and build our content strategy around this. But it's not that hard for people who choose to focus on doing so. And this will be an incredible benefit. According to CCS's plan giving report, organizations with at least one dedicated plan giving staff raise 300% more than those with part-time or no dedicated staff. So what we're seeing is that leadership is starting to see this and invest more in plan giving. And so you want to be in that area as a career path. When we ask about how high a priority is your organization, you can see 18% say it's a very, very high priority, 22% rated as a 4, and 28% rated as a 3. So you're starting to see this shift over time. Only 12% say it's not a priority at all. FreeWill partners, just a small plug for FreeWill, have exclusive access to planned and non-cash giving trainings. If you're not a partner, we've also tried to put as much effort as we can to make you a little bit smarter. We have things like our plan giving report, previously recorded webinars. You can get 1.0 credit for each. So if you really want to just lock yourself in a room and listen to 15 hours of me, you can get your CFRE credit in a single day. So I don't wish that on anybody. But it is an option. When we ask you if you have a dedicated plan giving staff member, 55% say no, but 25% say yes full-time, and 16% say part-time. And you can see 4% are planning to hire one, which is actually quite a large number, even though it looks small. This planning to hire is a big part of the world. So that means all of those jobs are going to be created for folks who are ready for plan giving jobs. Other great opportunities to become an expert here, joining your local plan giving council and National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. We love what we call CGP. Read the work of Dr. Russell James, maybe my very favorite academic of all time. You can hear Dr. James talk in Why Cash is Not King in Fundraising. That tends to be a little bit more focused on this non-cash gifts, but he is brilliant, and everyone that listens to him thinks so as well. And then the component of this, right, the echo to plan giving is while people are alive, helping them with tax smart giving, right? Fundraisers who can effectively communicate the benefits of non-cash giving will be invaluable to the organization. Why is this? Because your nonprofit will get gifts that are larger from exactly the same people, right? It will really help you hit your goals. And if I got a resume today that said, and I was a VP of development that said, strong in AI, strong at plan giving, strong at tax smart gifts, I would say, can you start on Monday, if not sooner? The ability to clearly explain the advantages of these will be essential. IRA giving, gifts of stock, crypto, donor advised funds, right? Things like AI can really help you in getting really clear talking points, and we've done that as well. Some other resources to get you started here. Again, there's some exclusive access to what we call SGS, Smart Giving Suite trainings. You also might want to follow Julie Ordonez of the Nonprofit Courage Lab. You can look at our donor advised fund report. We are soon putting out a 2025 stock report because we've seen a banner year for stock giving. I'm going to pause here and ask you for a favor, which is when you get when you get an email from me later today that will have the recording and the slides in it, there will also be a link to a questionnaire that will feed into the research that goes in that report. If you can take 5 minutes to fill it out, we will be incredibly grateful, and we will send you a copy of the full research, and it will help you and it will help the industry. So please, please, please do that. Okay, we are going to wrap up here. A couple of notes. My colleague Phoebe, again, heroic Phoebe, thank you so much, there we go, dropping a note in the chat. There's a link there. First thing in there is, would you like a copy of this book? And if so, where can we send it? We also want to know whether this was helpful to you. And we want to know whether you're interested in a one-on-one demo of either the plan giving tools, the smart giving tools, or Grant Assistant, who we talked about. So hopefully that's useful to you. And then on Thursday, if you're interested, at noon Eastern, so in about 47 hours from right now, there's what we call a FreeWill Services Showcase. So my colleague Nicole, who's a senior director of planned and major giving strategy, flat out brilliant, spent something like 14 years as the head of planned giving at Make-A-Wish Foundation, or sorry, Make-A-Wish America, rather. Lauren Winter Hansen, who's trained hundreds and hundreds and thousands of nonprofits in planned and major giving, and Danielle Devling, who's our content team lead, will sort of talk about all the support that FreeWill gives with each of its software packages. You can join that as well. Meg says, Nicole is the best, and I will pass that on to you. I'll pass it on to Nicole, rather. Thank you so much. All right. And then next steps. So please join on Thursday if you can. On the 28th, so 2 weeks from today, we will do a deep dive on practical AI uses in 2025 for nonprofit fundraising. A ton of technology has been unveiled in the last 6 months that can be quite interesting and quite useful. My personal belief is that we will see more progress on AI every quarter of 2025 as we saw the entire year of 2024. This is an area where there's incredible acceleration from academics, from venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, from governments, and it's wild to see. It's the fastest advancing technology of our lifetime, or probably anyone else's lifetime to date, with the exception of, potentially some wartime advances out of absolute necessity. But really, really interesting to see. So we'll sort of do a deep dive on what the heck is happening in terms of this. Where is it likely to go for the rest of the year? And what are some extremely practical things that we can sort of safely and easily and enjoyably use to hit our goals with AI? So we'd love to have you there. Thank you so much for joining. Happy New Year. I realize this is our first one of the year, and so we know that it's already been a sort of pretty eventful year and a wild one, but hopefully it's a really great year across the board, right? Obviously, there's going to be ups and downs like any year. So we'd love to see you here. We'd love to see you on Thursday. We'd love to see you in 2 weeks. And just a huge thank you for everything you've done. I know that many of you are just coming out of the haze of end of year giving and wrapping that all up and sending all your thank you notes and doing stewardship. And it just means a lot that you're investing in yourself for your career, investing in your organization for the mission.